Welcome to the Swing Shift with the Hudson Valley's favorite professional swing dance instructors, Linda and Chester Freeman. The Swing Shift will keep you hep to the jive on everything about swing. Swing dance was the most popular form of dance since the big band era of the 1930s and 40s, and into the rock and roll era of the 1950s. Since the 1980s, it has enjoyed a resurgence as one of the most popular forms of social dance. Join us now in the studio.
Welcome to the Swing Shift with Linda and Chester Freeman. I'm Linda.
And I'm Chester, and the focus of today's show is legendary swing dancer Frankie Manning.
Frankie Manning was one of the most famous swing dancers at Harlem's legendary Savoy Ballroom back in the 1930s. And he went on to appear in movies, on stage. He pretty much revolutionized the Lindy hop, which was the term for swing dance back in those days, as it is today. And Frankie, he was the first person to do aerials, which is what he called air steps, where you're tossing your partner up in the air and landing synchronized with the music. And he also did synchronized routines, and he was the first person to do synchronized ensemble routines. He went on to work at the post office. He had, after many years working in the dance world as a professional dancer, the music started to change. And so he went to work in the post office for 30 years. And then in the 1980s, when swing dance became a big hit once again, he came out of retirement, brought out of retirement from dancers all over the world who wanted to learn this dance that he was such an expert at. So they pulled him out of retirement and into the dance world once again. And he went on to become what we call the ambassador of Lindy Hop. He also won a 1989 Tony Award for his work with Black and Blue choreography. And he worked on Malcolm X, the film that Spike Lee did. He was a consultant, a dance consultant, and he performed in Malcolm X.
And he was also a performer back in the day and performed on stage with legendary jazz greats, Ethel Merman, Cab Calloway, Count Basie, Duke Ellington. Who am I forgetting?
Everyone. He's just a phenomenal dancer, a phenomenal man. And so there's one person who probably knew Frankie better than anyone, and that is the person who worked on his book with him. And our special guest today is Cynthia Millman. And Cynthia is the co-author of Frankie's book, The Ambassador of Lindy Hop. And that was published in 2007 by Temple University Press. And here's Cynthia. So hello, Cynthia.
Hello. Hi, Linda.
Hello.
Hi, Chester.
So
Thanks
welcome.
for having me here.
Well, it's our pleasure.
And one of my favorite topics.
Yes, one of our favorite topics as well. So, Frankie was such, he spent 30 years in the post office, and nobody knew that he was this famous dancer. And part of it was that he was such a modest man. So how did you get Frankie to give you his life story and agree to do a book with you?
Okay. I think that Frankie had, his mission in life was to uplift people and entertain through his dance and by entertaining. And he didn't think his life story was that interesting to people, but as he got to know more and more young swing dancers, and he was constantly being asked about his past, and he would start to share his stories, and he would see the response of people, and there was just this rapt attention to his stories. I think he started to realize slowly but surely that people were interested in his story, and that part of his mission was to share that with people. And it started, I was in the group that Chester's and the Big Apple Lindy Hoppers, and we would go out after every rehearsal and be at dinner, and we had this game called Categories, and it started at the first one. You give a category and everyone would go around the table and tell a story.
Okay.
So the first category was brushes with the law, and Frankie had this wonderful story about just on the spur of the moment, without, he was not a thief, but he saw a little toy car in Woolworths when he was a child and just kind of pocketed it and got caught and ended up spending several hours in the basement of this store cleaning up to make up for it. So that was his story. And we just kept going through more and more stories, and I started realizing that he had an incredible life and he had an incredible ability to share it. He was a really good storyteller. And then, as you know, as he started traveling around the world to teach swing dancing, more and more event organizers started including an evening with him where he would sit on a stage and be interviewed or just take questions and tell stories. And those were, really well received. People loved them. We did some of those together at the Beantown Summer Dance Camp, and I was amazed at, there was one where we went on for 2.5, 3 hours. Nobody stopped us. We didn't stop, and people just were so mesmerized by him. So I think he started to understand that it was part of his life's work was to share this, and it wasn't. I had done some interviews with him, and we had started doing some lectures, and I think he felt that I was very devoted to trying to bring out his story as accurately as possible, and so it wasn't really hard to convince him once things got going.
And we're so glad you did, because, unfortunately, Frankie did pass away, and this book enables us to keep hearing those stories and keep knowing the stories and keep sharing the stories.
Yeah.
And that's such an important thing.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell us what your favorite story in the book is?
I have so many, and when I reread parts of it, I'm looking at the book. When I reread parts of it, like, they jump out at me, and I mean, some of them are big, splashy stories with a big punchline, which is how Frankie originally saw his life. I mean, when we first started doing these lectures, we'd build the lectures around these big stories, but over time, some of the smaller stories started to come out, and I love some of those also, or just information. But I suppose the one set during World War II, where he's basically has no dance in his life. I mean, he's working, he's in war, and he also describes how it was the time in his life when he experienced some of the worst racial prejudice that he ever experienced. He had to give up. He was just living this wonderful life that he wanted, performing all over the world, and all of a sudden it ended. But anyway, so he went to, they had these USO shows, and there was one with let's see, who are they, with...
Well, I know Betty Grable.
Betty Grable, yeah.
Yes.
And another smaller star. And he described how the guys were washing their clothes and getting all dolled up and ready for this for days in advance. And he managed to be near the front of the stage because he knew that they would call people up. And he got up on stage. They called up about 25 guys, and there were these 2 stars. And they would each dance with a guy, and then was it Benny? Oh gosh, this is why I'm glad it's in a book, because I can't remember it. Jack Benny interviewed each guy. So in the meantime, Frankie was going around to the band, because he knew the band was a really important part of this. He's always given credit to the band and the music for whatever happened on the dance floor. So he was talking up the guys, buttering them up, letting them know he danced at the Savoy, which they all thought was cool, that he knew all these other big band leaders and musicians. And when it got to be his turn, he danced with Betty Grable. And now, as he described, she smelled so good. She felt so good. He said she wasn't much of a dancer. But he was able to do some of his stuff, and he said the crowd was just eating it up, which is what gave him joy in life, was to give pleasure, particularly to these guys, in the middle of this war theater. And he said, so at the end what he did was he just picked her up and carried her off stage, which he said just brought down the house. And then he came out, and she said to him, soldier, you can dance, come on out, take a bow. And so they danced some more, and then they did the whole thing over again. He carried her off, yeah. And of course, he had been able to set the tempo for the band to be exactly what he needed, so he could do the dancing he wanted. So I love that story, because it's just, it's like, one of the things about Frankie was, it looks like this wonderful life looking back on it, and it was, but there were a lot of hardships in his life and a lot of setbacks, and that was a hard time for him, and it was about how he just found a way, that inner spirit that we were all so drawn to, that all these, you and I and all the swing dancers just loved to be around so much. It was just so good to be in his presence, that spirit came through, and it got to the band, and it got to the audience, and it got to the Betty Grable, and just kind of came through, and
Yeah.
you
You talk about how he brought down the house, and I remember in his book there were actually a lot of instances where that was a problem. If the Lindy Hoppers came out and brought down the house, the people that had to follow that, the other performers and entertainers, would get upset, right?
Yeah.
Because they were still in the show.
Well, as you well remember, because you edited the book, so you were giving that introduction, and I'm thinking, boy, she remembers really well, and as she should, since you went through it, with a fine-tooth comb, and helped so much to make it what it became. But yeah, there was the first professional gig that they had, or one of their first ones, was a Cotton Club review at the Alhambra Theater in Harlem, and they were such a smash that they got kicked out of the show,
Right.
Which was devastating. I mean, they took a break between shows and came back, and they weren't in the next show. I mean, it was devastating to them. And I think he also admired Ella Fitzgerald a lot, because at one point they were coming out before her, and they were moved to after her to close the show. But she was very graceful about it. And he told me, it's in the book, that years later when they were in a show together, she said, "Put them after me. I don't want to have to follow them." But there's another wonderful story where Ethel Waters got very upset at the attention that they were getting, and Frankie went and kind of, and another thing that was so great about him, he just such dignity, and he went and spoke to her on behalf of the group, ready to take the rap and ready to be fired by her, but because of the way he handled himself, she kept him in the show, and they actually grew to be very, very good friends over time. So.
And he was good friends with Ella Fitzgerald as well. He talks about dancing with her a lot during the breaks.
Yes, she liked to dance with him, and Ethel Waters also, when she was at the Savoy. Ella Fitzgerald and Frankie had a kind of, what we call bro-sis kind of a relationship. That was, I think with Ethel Waters, there was a little more romantic interest on her part, but I don't think, there was just, I think there was, he had other stuff going on, I think.
Well, he was a good-looking man.
He was.
Until 95, he was a good-looking man.
Yeah. He was always his whole life. He was clearly somebody who had, we saw the incredible personal charm, and that was obviously there from when he was a little boy. I mean, he describes how various people kind of took him under his wing, even as a kid, and I can just imagine what an adorable child he must have been.
Oh, yeah.
Speaking of him as a little boy, can you tell the story of his first dance experience when his mother took him to dance?
Oh, yeah. No, are you to the
Renaissance Ballroom?
Yeah, we started the book with that because it just, it just set up so dramatically, like the what happened later as opposed to what happened early. So he had fallen in love with dancing when his mother was taking him to rent parties in Harlem, where people who were having trouble making the rent would throw a party in their apartment and people would pay. And there was always music at these events and dancing. And from what he describes, I mean, there were the partner dances of the day, and also a lot of sort of solo improvisation, Charleston kind of hot type music. And he describes how he would he was supposed to be asleep on the bed while his mom was out partying. She'd leave him in the coat room, but he'd sneak out, just opening the door at first, but then sneaking out, and he describes sort of getting down on the floor and peering through people's legs at the dancing, and that's when he really fell in love with dancing. So his mother was part of a social club in Harlem, which was very common, and they put on dances, and he was very thrilled to be going to a dance at the Renaissance Ballroom with her. It was around Halloween, so it's a Halloween theme, and he talks about getting all dressed up and with his knickers, and it's so cute. And he went there, and he was in a booth with her friends in the balcony actually watching, and his mom invited him to come down and dance with her. So he says he thought he was doing exactly what he saw on the floor. He was certainly doing his best to imitate it. And as the dance was over and they walked off the floor, his mom was shaking her head, and Frankie said, "What's the matter?" And she said, "You'll never be a dancer, you're too stiff." And that became, now this is another thing that I really, really think is so extraordinary about him. He had he was so persistent, and he just would set a goal and go for it and work so hard. He had such a work ethic, and so he decided that he wanted to dance, and he was going to work on that problem.
Prove his mama wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Rather than giving up, which
Sure.
is how so many people would respond. And so he described us going into his room. He had a little gramophone, and he would play his one or two records and dance with the broom. And he would try to bend from side to side and wobble around to get unstiff. And he talks about how when he was in the Cotton Club in 1936, which was the epitome of where you could perform if you were an African-American performer in those days. In fact, at that time, another group of Lindy Hoppers was out in California making Day at the Races, and I asked him once, did he feel a little jealous or envious of them that they were making a movie and he wasn't? And he said, no, not at all. I was in the Cotton Club. I mean, to me, I was in the best place I could be. So his mom came to see him at the Cotton Club, and he asked her, he said, am I still too stiff? And she was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I never said that.
She had totally forgotten the thing that
but
he
it
never
had
forgot.
No, right?
Well, we're all happy she said it, because it inspired him to become unstiff and one of the best dancers around. And the wonderful thing about hearing Frankie live speaking these stories is I remember when we brought him to the Hudson Valley here back in 2005, and we had an all-day workshop with him, and then you came and told stories and showed films. And here's this man, and I guess he must have been 90 at the time, right?
Yeah.
And he's telling his story with all this enthusiasm, and he's telling this exact same story about being 12, and he became 12. I mean, he just, his whole body, everything, he just became that little 12-year-old boy. And his ability to just transform himself and a room, it was just...
Right. And imagine that was the joy of doing the book, was we would meet, when he was in town, he started traveling a lot, but about once a week. And I would be interviewing, or we'd be editing what I had written, and I just got to be with that and ask any questions. But it's so funny what you're saying about when he was a kid. One of the hardest times that I have laughed, the most uncontrollably I've laughed as an adult, was him describing being a child. He was in Grand Central Station with his mom. He was eating a pork chop, and he was being sent down to South Carolina, where he'd go for the summer. And he totally became this child, and it was how he was saying to his mom, I wish she was making him use a knife and fork. And he said, I wish I was at home so I could just pick it up and eat it like we do it. And it was just the way he did this scene was like pouting, and it was so adorable. One of my real, I was so sad because I wanted to have a picture of him as a child in the book, because and I've actually got a little collection of pictures that I found of what I think he might have looked like that I've sort of collected over the years. But he said there were very few pictures, and that some of them were in a flood in his house, and a lot of that, whatever he had, got destroyed, which is too bad. But he did. He just had this ability to it just took you back in time. I mean, it made history come to life, which is what I look for in any kind of history book I read, or when I hear people like him speak. And, he did do that.
And we actually have a clip of him in an interview, and we'd like to show that for you so that you can see and hear the type of person that Frankie was.
Yeah, there's nothing like actually seeing him. It's in action too. Okay, so are we showing now?
What's the feeling you get now when you travel and you see everyone in the world, Lindy Hop.
Oh man, Manu, you cannot imagine how I feel, because right from the beginning, when I met Whitey, his idea was to try to spread the dance. Well, he was saying like all over the country, and this is like back in the 30s and the 40s, and the only way you could do that is by being present in a place. There was no videos and tapes and all that kind of stuff like that. There was no television or nothing, So the only way the dance could get spread is for you to be someplace and people see it. There were no dance schools. We didn't teach it, in a dance school. But his idea was to to get everybody in the United States interested. And whenever we would travel any place, if we walk into a restaurant and they had a jukebox, he'd put money in the jukebox and tell us to dance. And we would dance, and the people, they would see us dance. He'd say, oh yeah, that's wonderful. But that was the way he got it displayed. So now, I travel, and I'll just tell you guys, I travel around the world, y'all. And when I say around the world, I mean around the world, because I was, just in France, and then from France I went to Singapore and Australia, and all those places like that. And when I go to these places and I see these people dancing, I just feel so, I just feel so good inside that these people are picking up on this dance, and they're wanting to do it. They want to. And I just feel that if I can contribute to this boy, I will, And I feel very grateful that I'm still around to see all of this happening, Say, I know Whitey would have been great. It would have been wonderful if he could see what's happening now. But I'm glad that I'm here to see, and it's such a wonderful feeling to see people out on the floor and smiling at each other and talking to each other and having such a wonderful time, and it's just, I said, that is my inspiration and that is my life, because seeing all this going on it just keeps me alive. I just want to, I just wish everybody in the world could just do it.
That's just fantastic. I just love seeing him and hearing him. It's just so wonderful, and you can just sense that enthusiasm in his voice and enthusiasm in his life. It's just such a wonderful, wonderful thing.
Yeah.
So we're talking about the stories in the book, and some of our favorite stories, and some of your favorite stories.
What were your favorite stories?
Well, again, you thanked me for helping you edit the book, and I have a confession to make. The reason why I was so nice about helping you edit the book is because I wanted to hear more stories. I had had the opportunity to hear him speak so many times, but there was this whole like other life that I didn't understand. I didn't understand how he could disappear for 30 years. I didn't understand how the whole resurgence happened in all these different places. So I was eager to work with you on that book and find out those stories. And so it was a pleasure and honor for me as well. But one of my favorite stories that I had never heard before until I read the manuscript was his encounter with Clark Gable, the bet that he made with Clark Gable. So tell that story.
Oh, that was a great story. I was just reading that on the way up here. It's so funny because I still reread the book, and like just the other day, I was rereading it, and I was on the subway in New York and reading a part, and I started crying on the subway, and then I was like reading another part and laughing out loud. I mean, it just it does really bring him back, and it's a great way to connect with the memories we all have of him. So the Clark Gable story. So Frankie was, from when he was a child, just very athletic and physical. And one of the stories that I did love was when he talked about, as a child, he would get together with all these kids in Harlem, and they'd go up onto the rooftops, and the way tenement buildings are set up in Harlem, they're often around an air shaft in the middle, which is, and Duke Ellington did a song named after that. So they would put boards going up to the edge and run and jump over these air shafts that would, 6 flights above.
Fearless.
Yeah. So, he just did, and he was always jumping over things and climbing over things. And,
Well, he had those long legs.
Yeah, and he loved it. So with the Clark Gable, they were out in Hollywood making a film, and I guess they were always dancing. But when they were hanging around, I guess there were these high scaffolds.
Mm-hmm.
So Frankie just, for fun, climbed up one scaffold and just for fun, jumped from one scaffold to another. And I guess apparently Clark Gable was in the studio and saw him do that. And when Frankie came down, he said, he asked him if he thought he could do that again. And Frankie was like, do what? And what you just did, climb and jump. He said, yeah, I think I can do it. And he said, okay, well, listen, I'm going to bring, who was it? It was
Spencer Tracy.
Spencer Tracy, thank you. Spencer Tracy back tomorrow. And was it Myrna Loy they were with also?
I don't remember who they were
Yeah,
with.
they
I
were with
remember
it. There was
Spencer
some
Tracy, though.
actress, but Spencer Tracy. I'm going to make a bet with him that you can't do that. We're going to sort of set it up, okay? And then I want you to act like you don't know what I'm talking about, like you've never done it before. So they played the whole thing out. Frankie played his part perfectly, and he said that he pretended he was afraid going up when, for Spencer Tracy's benefit. But he said actually when he got up there the second time he did now he was starting to question his ability to do it. But and it's all described in in detail as he always described it. Of course he tells it so much better. But anyway, he made the jump, he came down, and then Clark Gable, I guess they had bet $25. So later that day Clark Gable came back and gave Frankie the $25 and said split it up with all the dancers, because all the dancers had been in on the whole thing and egging Frankie on and everything. So yeah, it was just such a great
It's
story.
great.
Set up a similar thing at I don't know if it was at the Savoy or not, but he set up a situation in which he was going to try to leap over the entire band
that
and
one.
land on the stage.
That was the one I was laughing about on the subway. Do you want me to tell it or should I read it in his words?
Sure, just
Is that
read it
okay?
real-
I mean,
so
because
we can hear his
Okay.
his voice channeled through you,
Yeah, let me see if I can just find
and
it.
which Cynthia did such a great job of really capturing Frankie's voice in this book, and that was an important part of, I think, your development of the book, to
Thank
really
you.
capture his
Well, he
voice.
had a very strong
He
voice,
did.
and I love the way he spoke, and
Right.
so it would have been, that was definitely one of the goals. And people have said they feel like they can hear him talking,
Yeah.
and so,
Yeah.
we're both really happy that.
So let's hear Frankie.
Okay. Okay. He said, when we were working at the Cotton Club with the Berry Brothers, they did this stunt where they jumped off a platform, leaped over the whole band, and landed in a split on the stage. It was sensational. Later that year, while we were appearing at the Apollo Theater, I got the bright idea to try doing the same thing with the Erskine Hawkins Band. The Apollo didn't have a platform that I could leap off of, but I had noticed that there was a bit of space on the bench that Avery Parrish, the piano player, sat on. So that's what he's going to leap off of. And then this part I figured that if I ran from the backstage area to build some momentum, then used the bench for leverage, I could vault over the piano and the band. This is a big band, okay? We're not talking about a trio, we're talking about a big band. Now, I love this part. I didn't tell anybody about my plan or rehearse it. But at the next performance, when Erskine Hawkins brought his hand down at the beginning of our song, I came running on stage, hit the bench, and flew above the piano. But I didn't quite make it over the band. No, I landed on top of the saxophone players' music stands. I scattered their books all over the stage. Uh-oh, I thought, and frantically started scrounging around for their music, putting it anywhere I could, on the wrong stands, in the hands of the wrong players, while the audience was laughing their heads off. At first, the band was in shock because they didn't realize what had happened, but once they did, they thought it was hilarious. They were used to playing in clubs and weren't actually reading the sheet music anyway, so they just kept blowing and cracking up at the same time. The Lindy hoppers who were cutting up tried to stay out of my way and kept going while I ran all over the place, grabbing papers and hollering, "Keep dancing, keep dancing." After the show, Mr. Schiffman, who owned the Apollo, came over and said, "That was great. Are you going to keep it in?" "Hell no," I said. I was lucky I didn't break my neck.
That's a great story.
Great.
Yeah.
So
and it was
we-
and so much information. I mean, even just the whole thing about how these players had the music, but they weren't even really using it. I mean, his
Right.
knowledge of what happened musically
So
was so
amazing,
deep.
so
yeah.
gifted in so many ways. And we could go on and on and on about Frankie and Cynthia. We are running out of time today, but we are having you back, and we're going to cover
Great,
more
thank you.
information about Frankie and really look at some of the films that he worked on and share with you some great, fantastic clips from those films. So this is Linda and Chester Freeman from The Swing Shift, and we'll see you next time.